Betrayal rarely arrives with a sudden, deafening strike. It creeps in through soft, hesitant apologies and averted eyes. Brianna knew her fiancé's smile better than her own, which was why she noticed when he stopped directing it at her. She noticed when his gaze drifted over her shoulder to her dearest friend. Tonight, the entire London elite expects to feast on her humiliation. They expect a weeping, ruined girl fleeing the ballroom. They are completely unprepared for the powerful duke who decides to intervene. Rain lashed against the tall, mullioned windows of the Linfield townhouse, distorting the London street outside into a blur of grey and mud. Brianna Linfield sat by the glass, a piece of heavy linen resting forgotten in her lap. She was not a beautiful woman by the strict, ruthless standards of the ton. Her features were too sharp, her dark eyes too observant, her jaw too firm. But she was considered handsome, possessing a respectable dowry and a pragmatic mind. For 2 years that had been enough for Anthony Powell, Viscount Norwood. They had grown up on neighbouring estates. Their engagement was not born of some grand, sweeping passion that poets wrote about, but rather a quiet, comfortable certainty. They knew each other's habits. Anthony liked his tea steeped for precisely 3 minutes. Brianna preferred riding in the early morning before the dew evaporated. They were a sensible match. Or so she had believed. Brianna pressed a fingertip against the cold glass. The chill seeped into her skin, grounding her. She traced the timeline of her own unease. It had not started with a grand discovery. It began 3 weeks ago, during a tedious afternoon party at Lady Carmichael's estate. Brianna had been trapped in a conversation with an elderly dowager regarding the merits of hothouse peaches. She had looked across the lawn, seeking Anthony to rescue her. She found him by the hedge maze. He was not alone. Charlotte Danvers stood beside him. Charlotte, with her spun gold hair and a laugh that made men lean forward just to catch the end of it. Charlotte, who had been Brianna's shadow and confidant since they were 7 years old, with scraped knees and ink-stained fingers. Brianna had watched them from afar. Anthony was leaning in, his posture angled entirely toward Charlotte, effectively shielding her from the rest of the party. Charlotte was looking down at her parasol, her cheeks flushed, before she peeked up at him through her lashes. It was a fleeting moment, a fraction of a second. But Brianna recognized the look. It was the heavy, suffocating gravity of 2 people who desperately wanted to touch, but knew they could not. Brianna had looked away. She had swallowed the sour taste in her mouth and blamed it on the warm lemonade. She told herself she was imagining things. Charlotte was simply vivacious. Anthony was simply polite. But the rot had taken root. In the weeks that followed, Brianna began to see the fractures in her perfectly ordered life. She noticed how Anthony's weekly visits to the Linfield home grew shorter. He cited estate business, parliamentary debates, a lingering headache. Yet his gaze would frequently dart toward the drawing-room door, as if waiting for a particular guest to arrive. And Charlotte had changed. The girl who used to burst into Brianna's bedchamber unannounced, demanding to dissect the previous night's ball over toast and marmalade, suddenly became scarce. When they did see each other, Charlotte was brittle. Her laughter was too loud, her eyes evasive. She spoke rapidly of ribbons and dress lengths, never once asking Brianna about the wedding preparations. The wedding was barely a month away. The invitations, thick cream parchment embossed with gold, had already been dispatched. The modiste was putting the final stitches into Brianna's gown. "Brianna, darling, are you listening to me?" Brianna blinked, pulling herself from the memory. Her mother, Lady Linfield, was pacing the length of the sitting room, an anxious energy radiating from her slight frame. "I apologize, Mother. The rain distracted me." "I was saying," Lady Linfield continued, stopping to straighten a slightly askew candelabra on the mantel, "that the florist requires confirmation on the centerpieces. White roses or the lilies? Anthony mentioned he had a fondness for lilies, did he not?" "He does." Brianna said. Her voice sounded hollow to her own ears. Lily's will be fine. Excellent. Her mother sighed, a sound of profound relief. It is all coming together. You will be a Viscountess, Brianna, a secure future. I only wish your father had lived to see it. Brianna looked back out the window. A carriage was pulling up to the curb, its wheels splashing through the muddy puddles. The crest on the door was familiar. A stag, rearing on its hind legs. Norwood. Anthony was here. Her stomach gave a vicious, unladylike lurch. He was not expected today. Brianna watched as the footman opened the carriage door. Anthony stepped out into the rain, not waiting for an umbrella. He looked dishevelled. He did not look up at her window. "Mother," Brianna said softly, her hands gripping the linen in her lap until her knuckles turned white. "Lord Norwood has arrived." Lady Linfield gasped, immediately patting her hair. "Anthony, now! Heavens, I am not dressed for company! Brianna, go down and receive him in the morning room. Ring for tea. I shall join you in a quarter of an hour." Brianna stood. The fabric fell to the floor. She did not pick it up. She walked toward the door, her steps measured, feeling as though she were walking to a gallows she had built herself. The morning room smelled of damp soot and dried lavender. Brianna stood by the cold fireplace, her hands clasped behind her back to hide their trembling. When the door opened, Anthony did not stride in with his usual easy confidence. He stepped over the threshold like a man entering a cage. He was pale, the skin around his eyes tight and bruised with lack of sleep. His cravat was sloppily tied, a stark contrast to his usual immaculate appearance. "Brianna," he said. His voice cracked on her name. "Anthony, you are wet." She gestured to his damp shoulders. "Shall I have Bates take your coat?" "No." He swallowed hard. "No, I am not staying." Brianna remained perfectly still. The silence in the room stretched, pulling taut like a wire about to snap. She did not prompt him. She would not make this easy for him. Let him choke on the words. Let him dig the grave. "I do not know how to say this," he began, looking at the carpet. He refused to meet her eyes. "I have paced my library for 3 nights trying to find the words, Brianna. There are no good words. I am a coward." "You are," she agreed evenly. Her bluntness made him flinch. He finally looked up, and the raw guilt in his eyes was almost pathetic. "I cannot marry you." The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Brianna felt a strange sensation in her chest. It wasn't heartbreak, not exactly. It was the structural collapse of her entire world. The safety she had banked on, the future she had arranged, all of it instantly vaporized. "The invitations are sent, Anthony. The banns have been read twice." Her tone was clinical, detached. "To break the engagement now is to invite a scandal that will swallow us both. I know." He took a step forward, a pleading gesture with his hands. "God, Brianna, I know. You have every right to despise me. I despise myself, but I cannot stand before an altar and pledge my life to you when I—" He choked on the confession. "When you belong to Charlotte." Brianna finished for him. Anthony turned an ashen white. He staggered back half a step, shocked. You knew!" "I am not a fool, Anthony." Brianna's voice finally hardened. The cold composure cracked, letting a sliver of genuine, biting anger bleed through. "I saw the way you looked at her. I saw how she avoided me. How long?" "It was not planned!" Anthony burst out, desperate to preserve some shred of his honor. "I swear it to you, Brianna, we never meant for this to happen. It was an accident. A conversation at a ball, a shared carriage ride. It crept up on us. We fought it. Charlotte wept for days over the guilt of it. She loves you." Do not dare speak of her love for me." Brianna snapped, her voice cracking like a whip. "If she loved me, she would be standing beside you right now. Instead, she sends you to do the butchery while she hides behind her tears." "She is in the carriage," Anthony whispered. Brianna froze. "She wanted to come in," Anthony continued miserably. "But she could not stop crying. She was terrified of facing you." A harsh, ugly laugh scraped its way out of Brianna's throat. How deeply tragic for her. Her suffering must be immense. She stepped away from the fireplace, closing the distance between them. Anthony actually flinched back. "You are breaking our engagement," Brianna said, her voice dropping to a dangerous, quiet register. "You are discarding me weeks before the wedding. I will be pitied. I will be the jilted bride, whispered about in every drawing room in London. Men will think there is something fundamentally wrong with me, and women will banish me to the edges of the ballroom. And you will marry my best friend." Anthony closed his eyes. "I will make a settlement. I will tell everyone it was my fault, that I am a scoundrel." "They already know you are a scoundrel, Anthony. It will not save my reputation." Brianna stared at his face, searching for the boy she had known, the man she thought was steady. He wasn't here. Only this hollow, guilty stranger remained. "Leave. Brianna, please, leave my house." She did not yell. The absolute deadness in her voice was far more terrifying than a scream. Anthony opened his mouth, then closed it. He bowed his head, defeated, turned, and walked out of the room. Brianna stood alone. She listened to the heavy thud of the front door closing. She walked to the window. Through the rain, she saw Anthony climb into the carriage. As the door swung shut, she caught a glimpse of a pale face and a mess of blonde curls. Charlotte. The carriage rolled away, taking Brianna's future, her security, and her oldest friend with it. The door to the morning room opened behind her. "Brianna, was that Anthony leaving? He didn't even stay for tea." Lady Linfield bustled in, carrying a fabric swatch. "Now, about the napkins. There will be no wedding, Mother," Brianna said to the glass. Lady Linfield stopped. The fabric swatch fluttered to the floor. "What did you say?" Brianna turned. She saw the confusion on her mother's face, knowing it would soon warp into panic and despair. "Anthony has broken the engagement. He intends to marry Charlotte." Her mother stared at her, the color draining from her cheeks. She swayed on her feet, grabbing the back of a settee for support. No, that is a cruel joke. The banns, the invitations. It is done." "But you are ruined!" Lady Linfield shrieked, the reality finally piercing her shock. "Brianna, you are utterly ruined. A broken engagement so close to the date, to your own friend. The scandal. Oh, the scandal! We must leave London. We must pack tonight and go to the country. We cannot show our faces. Stop!" The command was sharp. Lady Linfield blinked, shocked into silence. Brianna stood tall. Her heart was beating violently against her ribs, a frantic, trapped bird, but her mind was terrifyingly clear. If she ran to the country, she would confirm every whisper. She would be the victim, the weak, discarded thing. She would live the rest of her life in the shadow of Anthony and Charlotte's great, tragic love story. She refused to be a footnote in their romance. "We are not packing," Brianna said, her voice steady. "We are not fleeing. Tonight is the Harrington Ball. It marks the true opening of the season." "You cannot possibly mean to attend," her mother gasped, clutching her chest. "By nightfall, Anthony will have sent notices to the papers. The whole of society will know. They will tear you to shreds, Brianna. They will devour you." "Let them try," Brianna said coldly. "I will not hide in the dark because Anthony Powell lacks a spine. I will go to the ball, and I will look every single one of them in the eye." The Harrington estate was a monument to excess. A massive stone mansion situated in the heart of Mayfair, its windows blazed with the light of 3,000 beeswax candles, casting long golden rectangles onto the damp cobblestones of the street. Carriages lined up for blocks, a procession of polished wood, velvet interiors, and nervous anticipation. Inside the carriage, the air was suffocatingly thick. Lady Linfield sat rigid, clutching her reticule so tightly her knuckles were white. She had spent the entire afternoon weeping, pleading with Brianna to reconsider, suggesting feigned illnesses ranging from consumption to a simple ague. Brianna had ignored her. She had bathed, brushed her dark hair until it shone, and ordered her maid to pull the laces of her corset tighter than usual. She did not wear the soft, demure pastels favoured by debutantes and expected of a soon-to-be bride. She chose a gown of deep, striking emerald silk. It was cut low at the neckline, devoid of excessive lace or ribbons. It was a gown meant for a woman who did not ask for permission to be in the room. The carriage lurched to a halt. The footman opened the door, letting in the cacophony of the night. The shouts of drivers, the clatter of hooves, the distant swell of a string quartet. "Brianna," Lady Linfield whispered, her voice trembling, "I beg of you, it is not too late to turn back." "Hold your head up, mother," Brianna said, stepping out into the cool night air. "If you act like a victim, they will treat you like one." They entered the grand foyer. The air was heavy with the scent of expensive perfumes, crushed roses, and the underlying, metallic tang of nervous sweat. A long, sweeping marble staircase led up to the main ballroom. As Brianna and her mother handed off their cloaks, Brianna felt the first shift in the atmosphere. A group of young women standing near the cloakroom suddenly stopped talking. Their eyes darted to Brianna, then away, then back again. One of them whispered behind a feathered fan. The news had broken. Brianna kept her chin parallel to the floor. She placed her gloved hand on the brass railing and began the ascent. With every step, the music grew louder, but counterintuitively, the human noise began to drop. When she reached the top of the stairs, the major domo, a tall man with a powdered wig, took one look at her and hesitated. He had likely heard the rumors. He looked as though he wasn't sure if he should announce her or discreetly point her towards the servants' stairs. Brianna met his gaze with absolute, terrifying calm. She did not blink. The major domo swallowed, struck his staff against the marble floor, and called out, his voice echoing over the music. "Lady Linfield, Miss Brianna Linfield?" For a terrifying, agonizing moment, the music seemed to falter. It didn't stop, but the dancers lost the beat. The hundreds of voices conversing in the massive, gilded room dropped into a hushed, collective murmur. The sound of 100 fans fluttering simultaneously sounded like a flock of vultures taking flight. Brianna stood at the threshold. She looked out over the sea of silk, jewels, and judgment. Every face was turned toward her. She saw the dowagers, their eyes glittering with vicious delight at the scandal. She saw the young debutantes, viewing her with a mixture of horror and pity, terrified that her bad luck might be contagious. She saw the gentlemen, leaning against the pillars, placing bets on how long she would last before she burst into tears. And then she saw them. Near the center of the room, standing beneath a massive crystal chandelier, were Anthony and Charlotte. They had not intended to be caught in the open. Anthony looked panic-stricken, his hand instinctively reaching out to shield Charlotte. And Charlotte. Charlotte looked radiant. She was wearing a gown of pale blue, a diamond pendant resting against her collarbone, a pendant Brianna recognized as a Norwood family heirloom. Charlotte's face went white when she saw Brianna. She took a step back, hiding slightly behind Anthony's shoulder, her eyes welling with convenient, beautiful tears. A physical blow would have hurt less. The sheer audacity of it. To break the engagement this morning and parade the new prize tonight. It was a declaration of war. It was a public execution of Brianna's dignity. The crowd parted slightly. creating a physical barrier between Brianna and the rest of the room. It was a quarantine of social ruin. No one approached her. No one spoke to her. "Oh, God!" Lady Linfield whimpered behind her, shrinking back toward the stairs. "Brianna, Anna, they are staring. They are all staring. Let them," Brianna said. Her voice was steady, though she could feel a cold sweat breaking out at the nape of her neck. She forced herself to walk forward. She did not rush. She moved with deliberate, measured grace. She found an empty alcove near the tall windows and stood there, facing the room. She refused to look at Anthony and Charlotte again. She looked at the crowd, daring anyone to meet her eye. No one did. From the far end of the ballroom, leaning in the shadows of a heavy velvet curtain, Henry Cavendish, the Duke of Rothbury, watched the spectacle. He was a man who despised society. He found the ton to be a collection of vapid, greedy sycophants who measured a man's worth by the acreage of his estate and the antiquity of his title. He possessed both in staggering amounts. At 32 he was unmarried, notoriously ruthless in business, and possessed a cynicism so deep it bordered on the cruel. He attended these functions solely to remind his political rivals that he was still alive and still vastly more powerful than they were. He had heard the gossip before he even handed over his coat. The Norwood boy had thrown over the Linfield girl for her prettier, sillier friend. A classic, boring tragedy of the upper class. He had expected the discarded woman to hide at home, weeping into her pillows. Instead, she had walked into the lion's den wearing emerald silk and a look of absolute defiance. Henry took a sip of his brandy, his dark eyes fixed on Brianna. He noted the way the crowd gave her a wide berth, treating her like a leper. He noted the way the Norwood boy looked physically sick with guilt, while the blonde girl clung to him like a desperate barnacle. But mostly, he noted Brianna. She was terrified. He could see it in the rigid set of her shoulders, the slight, almost imperceptible tremor in the hat holding her fan. The wolves were circling her, waiting for the first sign of weakness to tear her reputation to bloody shreds. If she broke, if she ran, she would be ruined forever. Yet she stood her ground. Her chin was up. Her dark eyes swept the room with a cold, piercing intelligence that stripped the hypocrisy from every person who dared to whisper about her. There was no plea for pity in her posture. There was only a quiet, burning rage. Henry found himself profoundly intrigued. He hated weakness. He respected survivors. And the woman across the room was standing in the center of a social inferno, refusing to burn. He watched as a young lord, a known gossip with a cruel streak, began to cross the room toward Brianna, a smirking smile on his face, clearly intending to ask her a humiliating question to test her composure. Henry lowered his glass. The ice clinked against the crystal. He rarely intervened in the petty dramas of the ton. It was beneath him. But as he looked at the isolated woman in the emerald dress and the pack of jackals salivating at her ruin, a strange, dark impulse seized him. He pushed off the wall and stepped out of the shadows. Lord Townsend, a man whose primary occupation was collecting other people's miseries and redistributing them for sport, slithered through the parted crowd toward the alcove. He possessed a weak chin and a malice that masqueraded as wit. Brianna watched his approach with a sickening sense of inevitability. Her back pressed hard against the cold plaster of the wall. She adjusted her grip on her fan, bracing for the impact of his feigned sympathy. Townsend stopped 3 paces away. He pitched his voice loudly enough to ensure the surrounding dowagers would catch every syllable. "Miss Linfield," Townsend drawled, his lips curling into a predatory smile. "What an unexpected delight to see you this evening. Though I confess we all assumed you would be indisposed. A sudden chill, perhaps, or a sudden change of marital climate." A low ripple of cruel amusement snaked through the nearest onlookers. Brianna locked her jaw. She refused to look at her mother, who was currently whimpering softly near the draperies. She looked directly at Townsend's pale, watery eyes. "My health is perfectly robust, Lord Townsend. I appreciate your concern, misplaced though it is." "Robust?" Townsend repeated, tasting the word. "How commendable. One must have a strong constitution to weather such abrupt seasonal changes. Tell me, did Norwood leave you the lilies, or did he take those with him to his new bride?" The air in Brianna's lungs evaporated. It was a direct, brutal hit. The crowd leaned in, breathless, waiting for the tears, the slap, the inevitable retreat. Before Brianna could form a cutting reply, a shadow fell over Townsend. Henry Cavendish, the Duke of Rothbury, did not walk. He displaced space. He was a tall, sharply angled man, clad in stark, unadorned black evening wear. He possessed none of the peacocking flair of the young lords, yet his mere proximity forced a physical reaction from the crowd. People stepped back. The hushed whispering died instantly, replaced by a suffocating, terrified silence. Townsend turned, annoyed at the interruption, and found himself staring at the Duke's cravat. He looked up, his sneer faltering into a mask of pure panic. "Your Grace," Townsend squeaked, executing a hasty, clumsy bow. Henry did not look at him. He looked at the floor, then at the plaster molding, examining the room with an expression of profound boredom. "Townsend, you are blocking the draft. Move." I was only conversing with Miss Linfield, Your Grace, extending my sympathies." "Your breath smells of cheap gin and bad intentions," Henry interrupted. His voice was not loud, but it carried a deadly, vibrating authority. He finally turned his dark, unforgiving gaze on the younger man. "I said, move." Townsend swallowed audibly. He looked at Brianna, then back to the Duke, realizing with dawning horror that he had wandered onto a battlefield drastically above his rank. He scrambled backward, nearly tripping over a dowager's hem in his haste to retreat into the safety of the herd. Henry watched him scurry away. Then he turned his attention entirely to Brianna. Up close, the Duke of Rothbury was imposing in a way that had nothing to do with physical size. His face was a study in hard lines and aristocratic indifference. There was a small, faded scar cutting through the edge of his left eyebrow, giving him an inherently dangerous asymmetry. He did not look at Brianna with pity. He looked at her the way a general might evaluate a soldier who had refused to break ranks under heavy artillery fire. An irritating pest. Henry murmured, his voice dropping to a register meant only for her. "Like a gnat, you would have swatted him eventually, but I lack patience this evening." Brianna stared at him, her pulse drumming a frantic rhythm in her throat. She had never spoken to the Duke. They ran in the same massive, intersecting circles of London society, but he inhabited the uppermost stratosphere, a place of kingmakers and political titans. "I did not require rescue, Your Grace," Brianna said. Her voice trembled slightly, betraying her, but she kept her chin elevated. "I'm aware," Henry replied, his eyes dropping briefly to the white-knuckled grip she had on her fan. "If you required rescue, you would not be standing in this alcove wearing a dress designed to blind your enemies. You are surviving. I merely accelerated the process." He stepped back and executed a bow. It was not the hurried, perfunctory dip of duty. It was a deep, precise, technically flawless bow of profound respect. The collective gasp from the ballroom was audible. "Miss Linfield," Henry said, extending a gloved hand toward her. "I find myself profoundly bored by the sycophants in this room. Would you do me the honor of this waltz?" Brianna looked at his outstretched hand. The implications crashed over her in rapid succession. To dance with the Duke of Rothbury was not a mere social interaction, it was an endorsement. It was an armored shield forged from his untouchable rank. If she took his hand, the whispers of pity would instantly curdle into rumors of conspiracy. How had she secured him? Had she thrown Anthony over for a duke? The narrative would shatter and rebuild itself in a matter of seconds. She looked up into his dark eyes. She searched for a trap, a joke, a cruel punchline. She found only a cynical, waiting intelligence. "Why?" she whispered. "Because," Henry said softly, "they want to see you bleed. And I have a violent aversion to giving this crowd what they want." Brianna slowly closed her fan. She reached out and placed her hand in his. His grip was warm, solid, and completely unyielding. "I would be honored, Your Grace." Henry led her away from the wall. The physical sensation of moving through the ballroom was entirely different now. Before, she had waded through a mire of hostile stares. Now the sea parted. The guests fell back in uncoordinated waves, clearing a wide path to the center of the floor. Brianna kept her eyes fixed straight ahead. Peripherally, she saw faces frozen in comical masks of shock. She saw Lady Jersey leaned so far forward she nearly tipped out of her chair. As they reached the center of the floor, the musicians, who had been dragging their bows across the strings in a state of distraction, jolted to attention. The conductor hastily tapped his baton. A waltz began. Henry turned to her. He placed his right hand firmly against the small of her back. The heat of his palm bled through the emerald silk, a sudden grounding anchor in a room that felt as though it were spinning off its axis. Brianna placed her left hand on his shoulder. Beneath the fine wool of his coat, his muscles were tense, coiled like wire. They stepped into the turn. "You are shaking," Henry noted. He kept his gaze fixed on her face, ignoring the hundreds of eyes boring into them. "I am a woman standing in the epicenter of a social earthquake, Your Grace," Brianna replied, focusing on the knot of his cravat to avoid looking at the crowd. "A little tremor is to be expected." "A fair assessment." Henry steered them smoothly around a couple who had been too stunned to clear the floor. "Breathe, Miss Linfield. You have the upper hand now. Look at them." "I would rather not." "Look at them," he commanded, his tone gentle but unyielding. "Do not hide. You paid for this ground. Claim it." Brianna forced her eyes up. She looked past Henry's shoulder as they rotated. The blur of the ballroom sharpened into distinct vignettes of panic and frantic whispering. The dowagers were huddled together, heads practically touching. The young lords looked baffled. Then the rotation brought her face to face with Anthony and Charlotte. They were standing near the punch tables. Anthony looked as though he had been struck with a heavy mallet. The color had completely drained from his face. He was staring at Brianna and the Duke with a slack-jawed expression of pure disbelief. Charlotte looked worse. The radiant, triumphant glow of the stolen bride had vanished. Her hands were clutching her pale blue skirts, her chest heaving as if she could not draw breath. The surrounding guests, previously clustered around the new couple to offer congratulations, were slowly, unconsciously edging away from them, their attention entirely hijacked by the Duke. A sharp, dark thrill shot through Brianna's chest. It was a vicious, unchristian satisfaction, and she drank it in like cold water on a scorching day. "Ah," Henry murmured, observing the direction of her gaze. "The discarded fiancé and the treacherous confidant, they look remarkably like rabbits caught in a snare." "They look terrified," Brianna breathed. "As they should be. They assumed they had broken you. It is deeply unsettling to discover one has struck a rock instead of glass." Henry tightened his hold on her waist marginally, pulling her an inch closer. It was a microscopic breach of propriety, but in the center of the floor it was a thunderclap. "Why are you doing this truly?" Brianna asked, dragging her eyes away from Anthony and back to Henry's face. "You do not know me. You owe me nothing. Intervening in this mess offers you zero political or social advantage." "I do not require social advantage," Henry stated. It was not a boast. It was a simple statement of fact. "And you are wrong. I know a great deal about you, Miss Linfield. I know you managed your father's estate ledgers after his death. I know you secured a remarkably shrewd investment in the East India Company last year, operating through your solicitor to bypass the restrictions on female investors." Brianna stumbled over her step. Henry caught her effortlessly, carrying her through the missed beat without a break in their rhythm. "How do you know that?" she demanded, her shock momentarily overriding her composure. "I make it my business to know who possesses actual intelligence in this city, rather than just a breeding pedigree," Henry said. His lips twitched into the ghost of a smile. "You are pragmatic, Miss Linfield. You are sharp. You did not choose Norwood out of blinding, foolish passion. You chose him because he was a safe, manageable asset." Brianna flushed, stung by the clinical accuracy of his assessment. "That sounds incredibly cold." "It sounds like survival," Henry corrected. "Passion is a liability. It makes people stupid. It makes them abandon their commitments and parade their betrayals in public." He gestured slightly with his chin toward where Anthony and Charlotte stood. "I despise stupidity, and I respect a mind that calculates." The music swelled, signaling the final measures of the waltz. "What happens when the music stops?" Brianna asked, the reality of the impending silence creeping in. "I am still a jilted bride. You are still the Duke. They will assume this was a momentary act of charity. They will assume whatever we tell them to assume," Henry said. The waltz ended with a final, sweeping chord. Henry brought them to a halt, precisely in the center of the floor. He did not release her immediately. He stepped back, maintaining his hold on her right hand. The ballroom was dead silent. Every fan had stopped fluttering. Every breath was held. Henry looked down at Brianna. His expression was unreadable, a perfectly constructed mask. Then, slowly, deliberately, he raised her gloved hand to his lips. He did not press his mouth to the silk. He held it a fraction of an inch above her knuckles. The gesture was fiercely intimate, an old-world display of absolute fealty and claim. He lowered her hand. He did not let it go. "Miss Linfield," Henry said, projecting his voice just enough to ensure the surrounding perimeter heard him clearly. "I found this dance exceptionally illuminating. If you are amenable, I should very much like to call upon you tomorrow afternoon. Say at 3 o'clock, we can discuss future investments." Brianna stared at him. He was offering her a fortress. He was taking the shattered pieces of her reputation and reinforcing them with iron. She felt a genuine smile, sharp, victorious, and fully alive, curve her lips. "I would welcome it, Your Grace," Brianna said clearly. 3 o'clock will suit perfectly." Henry bowed again, offered her his arm, and began to escort her off the floor, leaving the burning wreckage of Anthony and Charlotte's triumph smoking in their wake. Morning broke over Mayfair with an aggressive, glaring brightness. Inside the Linfield townhouse, the atmosphere resembled the frantic staging ground of a military campaign. Lady Linfield had not slept. She had spent the dark hours oscillating between sheer terror that the Duke of Rothbury's intervention was a cruel prank and manic elation at the prospect of her daughter becoming a duchess. By noon, she had ordered the front steps scrubbed twice, replaced all the floral arrangements with obscenely expensive orchids, and harassed the cook into near hysteria over the consistency of the clotted cream. Brianna sat in the drawing room, wearing a simple day dress of dark navy. She felt completely hollowed out, yet thrumming with a bizarre electric energy. She had survived the Harrington Ball. More than survived it. She had weaponized her own ruin. At precisely 3 o'clock, the heavy brass knocker on the front door sounded. It was a firm, uncompromising thud. When the butler opened the drawing-room door, Henry Cavendish stepped inside. In the harsh light of day, without the softening glow of ballroom chandeliers, he looked even more severe. He wore a dark riding coat, tailored flawlessly to his broad shoulders, his boots polished to a mirror finish. He brought the scent of crisp air and leather into the cloying, floral warmth of the room. Lady Linfield immediately sank into a curtsy so deep she nearly toppled over. "Your Grace, we are so deeply honored. May I offer you tea, or sherry, or perhaps—" "Tea will suffice, Lady Linfield," Henry said, his tone perfectly but utterly dismissive. He looked past her to Brianna. "Miss Linfield." "Your Grace." Brianna remained seated for a fraction of a second longer than was strictly proper, asserting her own space before rising to offer a small, measured curtsy. "I prefer to take my tea without a chaperone, if you please, Lady Linfield," Henry stated. It was phrased as a request, but the syntax carried the weight of a royal decree. Lady Linfield gasped softly, her eyes darting between them. Propriety demanded she stay. Ambition demanded she flee. Ambition won effortlessly. "Of course, Your Grace. I shall leave you to your investments." She practically ran from the room, pulling the heavy oak door shut behind her with a definitive click. Silence descended. Henry did not immediately sit. He walked slowly around the perimeter of the room, his dark eyes cataloguing the furnishings, the books on the side table, the lack of sentimental trinkets. "Your mother is a nervous creature," he observed, pausing by the window to look out at the street. "She is a woman who spent yesterday believing she would die in poverty and disgrace, and today believes she might dine with the Queen." Brianna replied, dryly. "The whiplash is taking its toll." Henry turned, the ghost of a smile touching the corners of his mouth. He walked to the armchair opposite at hers and sat, crossing one long leg over the other. He looked entirely at ease, completely in command of a room he did not own. "Sit, Miss Linfield." Brianna sat. She kept her spine perfectly straight, resting her hands lightly in her lap. "You said you wished to discuss investments, Your Grace. I assume we are not actually talking about the East India Company." "No. We are discussing the investment of our respective futures." Henry leaned back, lacing his long fingers together. "I am 32 years old. My title is an ancient, heavy thing that requires an heir. My estates span 3 counties and require constant, tedious oversight. Society expects me to marry, and their relentless attempts to parade simpering, brainless girls in front of me have become intolerable." Brianna watched him carefully. "You are proposing an arrangement." "I am proposing a merger." Henry held her gaze. "I do not want a love match, Miss Linfield. I find the concept exhausting and prone to catastrophic failure, as you yourself experienced yesterday morning. I want a partner. I want a woman who is intelligent enough to manage my households without running to me with trivial crises. I want a woman whose nerve will not break when the political sharks smell blood in the water. I watched you last night. You walked into a firing squad and refused a blindfold." Brianna swallowed the sudden lump in her throat. No one had ever spoken to her like this. Men like Anthony spoke of duty and affection. They veiled their demands in soft, patronizing words. Henry was stripping away the velvet and laying the iron bare on the table. "You offer me protection," Brianna said, her voice steady. "You offer me a shield against the scandal Anthony created." "I offer you an empire," Henry corrected softly. "Scandal cannot touch a Duchess of Rothbury. The ton will bow to you, they will choke on their whispers, but I require absolute loyalty in return. We present a united front to the world. We do not falter. We do not play petty games of jealousy or spite. Is that understood?" "I have no interest in petty games," Brianna replied. She looked down at her hands, then back up to meet his dark, piercing stare. "But I must know one thing. Why me? Truly. Surely there are other women of strong constitution with better pedigrees and untarnished reputations." Henry uncrossed his legs and leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. The physical distance between them shrank, and the sheer force of his presence was almost suffocating. "Because, Miss Linfield, those women bore me to tears," he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble. "They are predictable. They are molded from birth to be decorative fixtures. You are sharp edges and cold calculation. I do not want a decorative fixture. I want a queen on my board who knows how to sacrifice a pawn to take a rook. You understand survival? So do I." He reached into the inner pocket of his coat and withdrew a small velvet box. He set it on the low table between them. He did not open it. "I am leaving for my country estate in 3 weeks," Henry said. "I intend to take a wife with me. I will handle the special license. I will handle your former fiancé and the gossip. You will handle my estates and my social engagements." He tapped the velvet box once. "Do we have a bargain, Brianna?" It was the first time he had used her given name. The sound of it on his lips was blunt, lacking the soft, lingering affection Anthony used to feign. It sounded permanent. Brianna looked at the box. She thought of Charlotte's radiant, guilty face. She thought of Anthony's weak, apologetic eyes. She thought of the lifetime of pity she would endure if she declined. She reached out and placed her hand flat over the velvet box. "We have a bargain, Henry. Hyde Park at 4 o'clock was not merely a green space. It was a brightly lit stage where social standing was aggressively negotiated. Carriages formed a slow, grinding procession along Rotten Row, allowing the occupants to see and be seen, to nod to allies and cut enemies dead with a carefully angled parasol. 2 days after Henry's visit, Brianna sat beside him in his open phaeton. The vehicle was a masterclass in understated wealth, gleaming black lacquer, silver fittings, drawn by a pair of massive, perfectly matched grey geldings. Henry drove them himself, his gloved hands handling the reins with a casual, terrifying competence. The air was crisp, holding the bright, deceptive warmth of late spring. Brianna wore a carriage dress of deep burgundy velvet, a matching hat perched on her dark hair. She felt the weight of the massive, square-cut sapphire on her left hand. It was an ancient stone, heavy and cold, completely overshadowing the modest diamond Anthony had given her. As they entered the park gates, the physical reaction of the crowd was instantaneous. Heads snapped around so violently Brianna feared she might hear necks breaking. Carriages slowed. Pedestrians stopped mid-stride. "Keep up your chin level," Henry murmured, his eyes fixed on the path ahead. He did not wave or nod to the gaping onlookers. He drove like a king surveying conquered territory. "I am perfectly level," Brianna replied, though her heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Good. Let them stare. It is how we establish the new reality." They completed one slow circuit of the park. Brianna felt the sheer, intoxicating power of Henry's presence beside her. People who would have shunned her 3 days ago were now desperately trying to catch her eye, hoping for a nod of acknowledgement. The social tide had not just turned, it had reversed gravity. As they began their second circuit, a bottleneck near the Serpentine forced the carriage to a halt. Brianna looked to the pedestrian path on their left. The breath snagged in her throat. Standing less than 10 feet away, trapped by the press of the crowd, were Anthony and Charlotte. They were walking arm in arm. Charlotte wore a new bonnet with ostentatious pink ribbons, but the color did nothing to hide the strained, fragile tension around her eyes. Anthony looked exhausted, his shoulders slumped, lacking his usual jaunty posture. The social isolation they had inflicted on Brianna was now actively turning on them. The people around them were maintaining a noticeable, uncomfortable distance, their eyes darting between the disgraced couple on foot and the newly minted power couple in the phaeton. Anthony saw her first. He stopped dead. His grip on Charlotte's arm tightened, causing her to wince and look up. Charlotte's gaze locked onto Brianna. Her eyes widened, tracking from Brianna's composed face down to the enormous sapphire resting on the velvet of her lap. A complex wave of emotions crashed across Charlotte's face. Shock, envy, and a desperate, pathetic hope. Before Anthony could stop her, Charlotte pulled away and took 3 steps toward the carriage. "Brianna!" Charlotte called out. Her voice was slightly breathless, trembling with manufactured vulnerability. "Brianna, please." Henry shifted beside her. He did not look at Charlotte. He simply tightened his grip on the reins, the leather creaking ominously in the sudden quiet that had fallen over the immediate vicinity. Brianna looked down at her former friend. She felt no anger. The white-hot rage of the Harrington ball had burned itself out, leaving behind a cold, clear ash. "Miss Danvers," Brianna said. Her voice carried easily in the crisp air. It was perfectly polite, entirely devoid of warmth. Charlotte flinched at the formal address. Tears instantly swam in her bright blue eyes. "Please, do not look at me like that. I know I have wronged you. I have not slept a wink since that dreadful morning. I want to explain. I want us to be as we were. Can you not find it in your heart to forgive us?" It was a brilliant, manipulative move, played directly to the audience of eavesdroppers. If Brianna screamed, she was the bitter shrew. If she forgave them, she absolved their guilt and diminished her own standing. Brianna leaned slightly forward, resting her sapphire-laden hand on the edge of the carriage. She looked at Charlotte with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing an insect. "Explain," Brianna asked smoothly. "What is there to explain, Miss Danvers? You wanted my fiancé. He proved himself weak enough to be easily taken. It is a very simple transaction. I require no explanations for cheap things." Anthony let out a choked sound of outrage, stepping forward to defend his new prize. "Now see here, Brianna, there is no need to be cruel." "Quiet," Henry said. It was a single word, spoken softly, but it cut through the air like a guillotine blade. Anthony snapped his mouth shut, his face flushing violently as he met the Duke's flat, dead-eyed stare. Henry did not raise his voice. He simply looked at Anthony as if assessing where to plant the knife. Charlotte was openly weeping now, her shoulders shaking. "I only wanted my friend back," she sobbed. "I am not your friend," Brianna said. She did not raise her voice either, finding a strange, mirroring rhythm to Henry's lethal calm. "And you are not my enemy, Charlotte. You are simply nothing to me. You are a stranger whose terrible choices are no longer my concern." Brianna sat back against the squabs. She turned her face forward, dismissing them entirely. "Drive on, Henry, if you please," she said. "The air here is growing terribly stale." Henry's lips twitched. He flicked the reins. The massive grey geldings stepped forward, the wheels of the phaeton rolling smoothly, leaving Anthony and Charlotte standing in the dust of the pedestrian path, surrounded by the judging, whispering elite. Brianna did not look back. She felt Henry's gaze on the side of her face. "Cheap things," Henry repeated softly, a note of profound, dark approval in his voice. "Flawlessly executed, my dear." Brianna looked at him. The cold ash inside her chest sparked with something entirely new. It wasn't love. It was too sharp, too dangerous for love. It was deep, anchoring respect. She had found a man who did not ask her to soften her edges. He asked her to sharpen them. "I learned from watching you," Brianna replied, the corner of her mouth lifting into a true, unforced smile. Henry laughed, a short, genuine sound that startled a passing footman. "I believe, Brianna, that we are going to be a terrifyingly effective partnership." St. George's Hanover Square was vast, echoing, and entirely devoid of lilies. Bands were bypassed entirely. Henry procured a special license with a single, sharply worded letter to the Archbishop of Canterbury, leveraging a political favour that had been owed to the Cavendish family for a decade. There were no engraved invitations. There was no extensive breakfast spread laid out for hundreds of ravenous, judging guests. Brianna stood before the altar in a gown of heavy ivory silk, completely unadorned by lace or seed pearls. The fabric fell in severe, elegant lines. Beside her, Henry stood rigid in formal charcoal wool. The only audience consisted of a weeping Lady Linfield in the front pew and Henry's solicitor, a man who possessed the emotional range of a filing cabinet, standing by as a witness. The vicar's voice bounced off the empty stone arches, sounding incredibly small. Brianna kept her eyes fixed on the gold cross above the altar. She felt a phantom tug of memory, the wedding she was supposed to have had. Anthony would have been nervous, sweating through his collar, smiling at her with that soft, malleable affection. The church would have been suffocatingly packed, the air thick with perfume and the collective, holding breath anticipation of society. She felt nothing but relief that it was gone. "Aye, Henry Anthony William, take thee, Brianna." Henry's voice did not echo. It grounded the room. He spoke the vows not as a romantic promise, but as a sworn oath before a magistrate. He was sealing a treaty. When it came time for the ring, he did not fumble. He took her left hand in his. His thumb brushed over her knuckles, a brief, grounding point of friction before he slid a heavy band of unadorned Welsh gold onto her finger. It settled next to the massive sapphire. It felt heavy. It felt permanent. "Aye, Brianna, take thee, Henry." She spoke clearly, her voice refusing to tremble. She looked at him as she said the words. He was watching her mouth, his dark eyes intense and wholly focused. There was no hesitation in him. He was a man who made decisions and carved them into stone. The vicar pronounced them man and wife. There was no sweeping, theatrical kiss. Henry simply bowed his head, lifted her gloved hand to his mouth, and pressed his lips firmly against the gold band he had just given her. An hour later, they were in a travelling chariot bearing the Duke's crest, navigating the heavy London traffic toward the open country. Lady Linfield had remained behind, armed with a staggering allowance and strict instructions from Henry to take a townhouse in Bath until the London gossip fully burned itself out. She had kissed Brianna's cheek, cried, and repeatedly called her Your Grace, with a mixture of awe and profound relief. Inside the carriage, the silence stretched, but it lacked the suffocating tension of Brianna's final encounter with Anthony. It was a silence of measured assessment. "You did not flinch," Henry noted, breaking the quiet as the city limits finally gave way to rolling green fields. He was leaning back against the dark, velvet squabs, watching her. "Did you expect me to?" Brianna asked, removing her bonnet and setting it on the seat opposite them. She ran a hand through her hair, exhaling a long, slow breath. Many women would have. The reality of tying oneself to a stranger, regardless of his wealth, often strikes hardest at the altar. Henry unbuttoned his coat, abandoning a fraction of his formal rigidity. "I am not an easy man, Brianna. I am demanding, I am frequently absent, and I possess a temper that most find deeply unpleasant. I survived a mother whose nerves required constant management and a fiancé whose spine was made of wet paper." Brianna replied evenly. "I believe I can manage a demanding man." Henry let out a low, rough laugh. "I pity anyone who underestimates you, Duchess." The title sent a strange, electric jolt down her spine. Duchess. It was no longer a theoretical arrangement or a weapon used to batter Anthony and Charlotte. It was her name. It was her reality. "London will tear them apart, you realize," Henry said, changing the subject with a blunt pivot. He looked out the window at the passing countryside. Norwood and his new bride. The ton hates weakness, but they despise a scandal that offers no subsequent entertainment. Now that you have elevated yourself entirely beyond their reach, the narrative will sour. Anthony will not be the tragic romantic hero. He will just be the fool who lost a duchess. "I know," Brianna said. She looked at the gold band on her finger. "I felt it in the park. The shift. They are already suffocating." "Does it trouble you?" She looked up at him. She searched herself for any lingering hurt, any residual affection for the boy she had grown up with, or the girl she had shared secrets with. She found only cold, clean air. "No," Brianna said honestly. "It does not." Henry nodded once, deeply satisfied. He reached across the space between them and took her hand. He did not say anything else. He simply held her hand as the carriage rattled north, his grip firm, uncompromising, and incredibly safe. Autumn stripped the leaves from the ancient oaks bordering Rothbury Hall, turning the sprawling estate into a stark, majestic fortress of grey stone against a pale sky. Brianna sat at the massive mahogany desk in the estate room, 3 ledgers open in front of her. She had been at Rothbury for 4 months, and she had spent every single day dismantling the archaic, inefficient systems the previous steward had left behind. She did not play the piano for Henry in the evenings. She did not embroider cushions. She managed his tenant farms, audited the mining revenues from his northern properties, and ruthlessly cut the bloated household expenditures by 20%. The door to the study opened. Henry walked in, bringing the smell of cold wind and horse sweat with him. He had been riding the southern perimeter since dawn. He crossed the room, stopping behind her chair, and leaned over to look at the ledger. "You found the discrepancy in the grain yields," he observed, his voice rumbling right next to her ear. "The bailiff in the lower valley has been skimming 5% for the last 3 years. Brianna said, not looking up, tapping her pen against the column of ink numbers. "I have drafted his dismissal. I also suggested to the magistrate that we overlook criminal charges if he leaves the county by Friday." "Efficient," Henry murmured. He rested his hands on her shoulders, his thumbs pressed into the tense muscles at the base of her neck, working a knot loose with firm, heavy pressure. Brianna leaned back into his touch, closing her eyes for a brief second. Their marriage was not built on the feverish, poetry-spouting passion that society novels championed. It was built on a foundation of absolute, unshakable competence. They operated as a single, lethal unit. Henry handled the politics, the House of Lords, and the vast, overarching strategies of his empire. Brianna managed the infrastructure, the finances, and the daily warfare of keeping a ducal estate running flawlessly. They respected each other immensely, and out of that respect something deeper, hotter, and vastly more dangerous had grown. A letter arrived from London, Henry said, his hands still working her shoulders. "From my man of affairs. It seems Lord Norwood is selling his hunting lodge in Berkshire." Brianna opened her eyes. She set her pen down. "Is his debt that severe?" "His gambling has escalated," Henry told her, his tone entirely detached. "And his new Viscountess has developed expensive tastes in an attempt to buy her way back into the good graces of the patronesses. They are failing miserably. The doors of Mayfair are largely closed to them. It appears a stolen fiancé is a poor substitute for a stable income and a spotless reputation." Brianna looked out the tall windows toward the rolling hills of Rothbury. She remembered Charlotte's weeping face in Hyde Park. She remembered Anthony's weak, panicked eyes in her morning room. It felt like a lifetime ago. It felt like a story that had happened to a completely different, much smaller woman. "He will lose the main estate within 5 years if he does not check his spending," Brianna calculated coldly. "Most likely," Henry agreed. He rounded the desk and leaned against the edge of the mahogany, crossing his arms and looking down at her. Does the Duchess of Rothbury wish to acquire a neighbouring Viscount's estate when it inevitably goes to auction? Brianna looked up at him. She saw the dark amusement in his eyes, the absolute, predatory loyalty he offered her. He would buy Anthony's ancestral home and hand her the deed just to watch her burn it, if that was what she requested. She smiled. It was a slow, sharp thing. I have no use for ruined properties, Henry. Let them rot in the bed they made. Henry's eyes darkened. He reached down, catching her chin in his hand, tilting her face up. You are magnificent, he said softly. It was not a compliment. It was a statement of profound, undeniable fact. He leaned down and kissed her. It was not the chaste, performative touch of their wedding day. It was demanding, consuming, and fiercely possessive. Brianna kissed him back, gripping the lapels of his coat, feeling the steady, powerful rhythm of his heart against her hands. There were no flowery declarations. There were no tears. They did not need them. Anthony and Charlotte had chased a frantic, destructive illusion of romance, and it was currently burning their lives to ash. Brianna had chosen pragmatism. She had chosen the cold, hard logic of survival. And in doing so, she had secured an empire, crushed her enemies without lifting a finger, and found a man who looked at her, sharpest, most calculating edges, and saw only a queen. The ballroom had expected a tragedy. Instead, they had forged a dynasty. Thank you for watching this story. If Brianna's cold, calculating revenge and her incredible rise to power kept you hooked until the very last word, please hit that like button to let us know. Don't forget to share this video with anyone who loves a fiercely intelligent heroine turning a devastating betrayal into an absolute triumph. Subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss out on our upcoming historical dramas, scandalous romances, and tales of sweet revenge. Drop a comment below. Would you have accepted the Duke's bargain? See you in the next video.